guys, my name is Barry and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be doing a review for Threads from 1984. Now the reason I'm doing this review is because I was recently in Sheffield and my friends Chris and Darren from The Slaughtered Lamb mentioned a movie called Threads, naturally because it was set in Sheffield and I was in Sheffield at the time. So both of them, being from Sheffield, recommended the movie to me. Now, I had heard of the movie before, but I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know anything about it, so they were telling me about it, and it was about this nuclear bomb that went off in Sheffield in 1984. And I'm like, I never even imagined that that's what it would be about. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to watch it and do a review for it. So here we go. Throughout the film, there's text that appears throughout. And at the start of it, I thought I'm not going to like this, but I actually do like the text that appears because it helps us understand what's happening. It helps us understand number of casualties, the weight of the bomb, etc. So there's certain things that we really want to know that they can't really relay on screen. Now this is a BBC original film, so it's got a limited budget to it, and you can tell because it is quite cheaply made, but it's still very well made for its time and well made for the budget that it had. So when they show text on the screen, I appreciate that because they can't show everything, and if they did, it would cost a lot more and it would take a lot longer to get through. It's got a good build-up of characters. There's quite a few characters in the movie that we follow, mainly Jimmy and Ruth at the beginning. We see that Jimmy is having a baby with Ruth and they're going to start a family and get married. And there's other characters in it that get built up really well because we know something's going to happen and maybe some of them are going to be split up. Throughout the beginning as well, we see rumblings of what could happen. We hear on the radio, there's wars going on between Russia and other countries. We see newspaper clippings. We see everybody talking about things. But during the time that people are getting a little bit scared, they're also thinking that can't happen and it's not going to happen. And it's quite eerie because it happens today. We see wars that are happening around the world. We see people, we see newspapers, people are talking about it. We're kind of scared, but we also think, nah, that's never going to happen. And it's exactly what happens in this movie. And that's what makes it quite scary because the way that people act, they go to the pub, they're watching the news, and the guy turns it off. And they're like, oh, turn that back. We were watching that. And then they turn it back and they're like, oh, that's quite scary. Could you imagine that happens here? Nah, it will never happen in a little place like Sheffield. I think the fear starts to set in, not just for the characters, but for us as we're watching it when news reports start saying what to do with dead bodies during a fallout. And I think when people start to see that on the news, in the film and in real life probably, they start to panic. They go to the shops and they buy out all the food that they can, all the water that they can get, anything they can get a hold of. They try and hoard just in case something like that happens. And just when I was watching it, I started to get goosebumps because I'm like, oh God, that feels like something that we would all do if something like that actually happens. We still get that sense of dread and worry, but there's still people acting calm beforehand. When that first nuclear bomb goes off, it was an 80 megaton bomb. I don't know what that is in terms of size, but when it happened, even though it looked a bit fake, I actually thought, oh my God, this is frightening. And it did feel frightening because the build-up felt so realistic that when it happened, because it happened in a little place like Sheffield, it felt real. It felt frightening. It felt horrific. I was like, oh my God. I actually really feared for these characters. Even though it's a 40-year-old movie, it hit me hard. I didn't see this part coming, but there was a second nuclear bomb. I don't know if it happened in Sheffield or just outside of Sheffield. You obviously see a bigger blast from somewhere, and then people started getting burned alive again. And this one was apparently around about 210 megatons, so almost 3 times the size of the first one that happened. And that's when things got really horrific. You could see people melting. There's even scenes where the kids were getting blown away and stuff. And I'm like, oh, it's hard to watch. It was really, really hard to watch because, again, I wasn't expecting it. I was expecting a film about a nuclear bomb that goes off and people dealing with the fallout. And of course, it kind of had to happen on screen. And it did. It happened on screen. The buildings were blown up. It felt like a scene from Terminator 2, but only a realistic version of Terminator 2. One of the worst scenes during that part for me was when Jimmy's parents were looking for Jimmy's little brother and they found him in the rubble. They just see his leg sticking up out the ground. He must have been about 10, 11 years old. And it was horrific. It was harrowing. Just watching the parents screaming and trying to get them out. And they were burning as well because obviously they survived the blast, but now they have to deal with the fallout. Of course, during the fallout as well, it's the radiation that they're dealing with. There's people that are stuck under a bunker who are the professionals. They've got loved ones as well, and they're trying to deal with rations. They're trying to calculate how many calories people can afford to eat until everything goes back to normal, but they all end up dying through radiation poisoning and suffocating. And then we just see the aftermath and the effects of the radiation, the suffering, the suffocating, and the fallout through everybody else that are above ground. During the fallout, we see the accounts of the next 13 plus years of what the effects of a nuclear bomb can have on people. Now, I don't know if it's accurate, but it looks certainly accurate to me, where people are suffering, people are starving, they're attacking each other. Even the military, when they come in, they start killing people, not because they want to, but they feel like there's groups of people that have food that the military can take from them and they can eat themselves. And it's about survival of the fittest. No more is there a governing military. It's just a military that's hanging around thinking we are superior to these people now, so we can take from them and leave them to live like dogs and eventually die. In terms of quality, it's very basic, especially for a BBC show. And obviously it's 40 years old, but it does deal with the realities of war very perfectly. And the reason I'm saying that is because 40 years on, like I mentioned, we are dealing with similar issues, similar conflicts around the world. And I feel like, personally, if anything like that goes down and if anything hits us here, I feel like the way it plays out in Threads is potentially the way it will play out in real life 40 years later. I like the build up to the bomb. I like the bomb scene, even though it was horrific. But what I felt was rushed was the fallout. Obviously, we dealt with 13 or so years after the fallout, and I can understand that because of budget restraints, etc. But there was scenes where it says 1 week later, 1 month later, 1 year later, 10 years later. So it felt like it went boom, 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 boom so fast. I know they wanted to get that point across within a certain space of time, within 2 hours, but the ending did feel a little bit rushed. We did get to a point where we don't find out what happens to Jimmy. We're assuming Jimmy died. Ruth survived. She had her baby during the fallout. The baby obviously had complications growing up. And then I don't know what age the baby was near the end. I'm assuming over 13 years old. But even still, it was kind of young. And at the end of the movie, Ruth's baby had a baby that was obviously deformed. And then that was the end of the film. I'm thinking it was just letting us know that the children who were living during the time of the fallout were obviously affected by what was happening with the radiation. And it does seem strange because just a couple of years later in real life, the Chernobyl disaster happened in 1986. And apparently people were affected by the fallout from that when people were pregnant. I did hear it's a bit of an urban legend, but anyone born in 1986 in Scotland, we got some of the fallout from Chernobyl that it travelled that far. But apparently anyone born in 1986 were hit by radiation when they were in their parents' stomachs and they were going to be deformed or really tall. And it's strange because that was 3 years after I was born, and anyone that I know was born in 1986 are freakishly tall. Overall though, guys, I think it was a really good film, a film that people need to see and be prepared for the realisms of war, because it was a very realistic movie. And like I said, it just feels like it's something that could happen 40 years later. When I was watching it, it took me back to the days of World War II. I was scared of World War II growing up, even though I wasn't born yet, but we would watch documentaries about World War II, more about World War II than World War One. I would see movies about it. When I was in school, we'd done topics, World War II topics. And even at that point, I lived near Clydebank. We had the Clydebank Blitz in the 40s with World War II. So that still hits a lot of people in my area. We've even still got air raid shelters in a lot of gardens around here. I had an air raid shelter in my last house, and that's a World War II air raid shelter. And we still see them around gardens today. So it's still quite harrowing from 1945. So seeing something like this in 1984 must have scared the life out of people, because it was less than 40 years after the war ended in World War II. So 40 years on from that to today, we're still getting things happening around the world that still scares us. And I think a movie like Threads just hits home. So thanks to Chris and Darren for the recommendation. It was a really interesting watch, a very scary movie that's not supposed to be a horror movie, but it's probably more of a horror movie today than it maybe was back in 1984. But if you've seen the movie, guys, what do you think of it? Leave your comments down below, let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you soon.
Meeting adjourned.
I'll be right back.
What are you waiting for, huh?
Coming to get you, Barbara.
Ever played Skin the Cat?
Someone to know!